Good evening, everyone. We are going to start very soon because we have many people on Zoom. And our Zoom congregation has forced punctuality within the building in ways the Jewish community never envisioned or imagined. So everything suddenly starts on time because people in their living rooms think there's a technological problem if they're not let in after a minute. So, great. So let's just come on in. And Peter, did we welcome our Zoom folks? All right. So that our Zoom folks know that they're in the right place, which is joining us via technology to be zoomed into our congregation with the many people here this evening. So let's take seats and then we'll formally begin. So welcome everyone here in the sanctuary and on Zoom. I recognize that we have visitors here visiting our temple community this evening to hear from Nadav. And so I just want to give you a special welcome and just share that we're grateful you're here. We at Temple Beth Elohim are now a community of over about 5,000 people that come from many towns and neighborhoods, about 30 towns in the Boston area, all sharing a deep commitment to Torah, the study of our values and ethics, to avodah, to reaching out to something greater than ourselves, to gimilut chasadim, to deeds of loving kindness, and a deep sense of identification with the state of Israel and the love of the Jewish people, recognizing that by joining in these things, these three things of Torah, avodah, and gimilut chasadim, in community we can become better people than we would ever be were we to be on our own. And so we come together as a people, and that often requires a debate and compromise, which is core to who we are as a temple community, often opening up our community to a diversity of speakers. And I just want to say that that's what I'm most grateful for at Temple Beth Elohim. It's in the DNA here. The story of Temple Beth Elohim was it was founded 75 years ago this year, and they had to debate between whether it would be a conservative synagogue or a reform synagogue in this town of Wellesley. And the oral history goes that it was a very close vote by one vote. Well, recently I learned it was actually 8 votes, that they voted in a strange way. And it just speaks to who Temple Beth Elohim is this day. They voted for a reform rabbi with a conservative prayer book. And so from the very beginning, they said ideology was not going to win out. What was going to win out was that it was a community that was going to stay together in the most difficult of times, in the most challenging of places, and gain strength from each other's presence. And it's true to this day. We have a very diverse community. And so the way we have stayed together is by empowering people to use their mitzvah muscles, meaning the temple doesn't sponsor any event, the temple building at Temple Beth Elohim. It's the temple members that make things happen around here. And so they create committees like the one this evening that I'm very proud of, J Street at TBE Committee. And they're sponsoring this event led by Neil Silverstein, our past president. And while Neil will share a little more later, I just want to put in the plug that I hope that if this is how you want to exercise your mitzvah muscle, you'll sign up and join with Neil in supporting the state of Israel. And so tonight we are blessed with a speaker provided by J Street, a very important voice within J Street, and a friend of Israel and the Boston Jewish community for a very long time. Someone who first spoke at TBE when he was studying at Harvard University many moons ago, and has continued to be a presence here over the years, speaking frequently at the temple. And so it's really great to welcome Nadav to TBE once again. But before we do so, I'd like to invite Neil to share a word about this evening.
Great. Thank you, Joel. It is my privilege on behalf of J Street at TB to welcome you all to tonight's program that we are sponsoring with J Street New England. We're excited tonight to hear from Nadav Tamir, former Israeli Consul General to New England and currently J Street's Israel Director. For those of you who are not yet familiar with J Street, we are the political home for Americans who care deeply about Israel and believe that a negotiated resolution agreed upon by Israelis and Palestinians can meet the legitimate needs and national aspirations of both peoples. How J Street works, we work in the American political system, in the Jewish community, and with others to advocate for diplomacy-first American leadership and policies that advance justice, equality, peace, and democracy in Israel, in the region and in the U.S. We'll talk a bit at the end of the program about how you can get engaged, but I've done enough talking for now, and I'm going to share a bit about the program, and then I'll pass it off to Joel to start the conversation. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go for about an hour. Rabbi Sissenwein and Nadav are going to do an initial conversation. We will do Q&A. So I think you've got note cards on or around your seats. Perfect. And when you've got a question, at points you can raise your note cards. We'll come by and we'll pick them up. And then we plan to end the formal program at 8:30, and there will be time to schmooze and have, I think, something to eat outside and continue the conversation. So with that, I'll hand it back to Joel to start the conversation. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, Neil. So once again, the questions are so that we can maximize our time with Nadav and hear his words more than our questions. And so what I've asked Nadav to do is first provide us with an address, and then we'll open it up to questions. So Nadav Tamir. Is that good? Yeah. Unless you want to walk around, I can get you a mic, but whatever you prefer.
I'm fine.
And you stay here, because Zoom has to hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rabbi Sissenwein. Thank you, Neil. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the J Street staff and board. Rabbi Sissenwein mentioned that I was here as a Wexner Fellow, and it was Shula Gilad who brought me and my Palestinian classmate at the Kennedy School to speak here. And since then, I spoke also here as Consul General, and even spoke here as the J Street Executive Director in Israel before October 7th during the assault on our democracy, which was then the major issue. But it's my first time after October 7th, and of course, nothing is the same. And I'll say a little about that. I have to say that when you mentioned the vote about if the congregation will be conservative or reform, and it was only one vote, I remembered that someone once told me that on the Mayflower, there was a vote if the language in the new country will be Hebrew or English, and English won by one vote. And I'm just thinking how easier it would have been for me to speak in Hebrew if the Hebrew votes would have won. In any event, yes, so I was actually here in Boston on October 7th, visiting my daughter, and I was supposed to start a tour for J Street around the country, staying at Nancy Buck's home as usual. And then my daughter burst into the room and said that her brother, our son, Ido, told her that to wake us up because there's war in Israel. And we started to understand what's going on, and we knew perfectly well that we have relatives and friends in kibbutzim next to Gaza, in Be'eri, in Kfar Aza, in Re'im. And Ido, my son, was already called to reserve service, and so was my son-in-law. And it was quite clear that we have to find a flight, and I was there on the day after. And that when also Hezbollah got into the party, and my kibbutz, where I was born, Kibbutz Manara, the closest to the Lebanese border, was evacuated. The kibbutz that my parents established in 1943, and they're still buried there, and my brother is a kibbutz member, and they're all evacuated since then, and 75% of the building got destroyed by Hezbollah rockets. So I came to a totally different country that I knew. You know, the trauma, the fear, the confusion, devastating. And since I arrived, I joined a group of former diplomats that was trying to help the families of the hostages. Like many other civil society organizations, we were filling the vacuum that the government left because the government didn't really function. And later on, I realized that it was not only Hamas in Gaza, and it was not only Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Houthis from Yemen joined the party, and militias, Shia militias from Iraq and Syria, and later on, exchanges directly with Iran. Something we never went through, definitely the toughest times in our life. But for me, as someone who also pay attention to what's happening on the other side, which most Israelis unfortunately are not, I was also completely devastated by the catastrophe in Gaza, the suffering of Palestinians that most Israelis are completely not aware of or don't want to be aware of. And also in the West Bank, that some of our ministers actually thought this is a good opportunity to take over the West Bank and gave backing to settler violence. So, you know, I can't even start to explain how horrible everything is. And while all of this is going, you know that you are being led by the worst government ever. And we had some bad governments. I mean, but this one, no comparing. So it's tough. It's tough, and those who know me know that I always find the silver lining, because I learned from my mentor Shimon Peres that optimist and pessimist die the same way, but they live very differently. And not only that it's more fun and healthy to be an optimist, and research prove that, it's also more constructive, because only optimists can really impact the world, because the pessimists see the obstacles and the barriers, and they fall into despair, but the optimist could actually change something. And I have to say that even though I was very happy to be with J Street even before October 7th, I felt even more after October 7th, because in times of such a tragedy, to be in a place that represent my values, and while everybody is so binary, most people are either for Hamas or for Israel, or to be an organization that could see a nuanced picture and could understand that we are for solution and we are not part of the blame game is very reassuring. And also an organization that don't believe only in being in a sense of urgency, but also in a sense of agency to do something about it and to act politically to change the situation. It's very reassuring. A professor of mine at the Kennedy School, Shula knows him, once told me that to be a change agent, you need the combination of critical mind and hopeful heart. And we Jews are very good in critical mind, but what we're trying to do is also bring some hopeful heart. And after all, hope, Atikva, is the name of our national anthem, and it's the story of Zionism. So why do I talk about hopeful things in such a bad times, and also, of course, after the results of the elections that I could say pretty clearly, even though I don't want to get too much into American politics because it's a synagogue, but we in J Street really, really wanted Kamala Harris to become president. But we don't think that the fact that we failed means that we have to lose hope, and I'll try to explain why. So where do I see hopeful scenarios. Let me start by saying that even though, as I said, Israelis and Palestinians are deeply traumatized and sad and lost trust in the other, and there is a mirror image where most Palestinians, if you tell them about what happened in October 7th, about the butchering and the rapes and the hostages taking, they will tell you, no, this is a Zionist propaganda. They wouldn't believe. And most Israelis, when you tell them what the entire world see about the suffering in Gaza, they would say, no, this is just Hamas propaganda accepted by anti-Semitic world. But the truth is that both are very much true. And how do you get out of this situation? So I can tell you that even now, even that we're pretty close still to the tragedy, we're starting to see some change, that when people are moving to a more rational space and less emotional, they're starting to understand that the lessons from October 7th are exactly opposite to their emotional feeling that nothing could come out of it and no trust. Because the lessons from October 7th are, first of all, we cannot manage or even shrink the conflict as some people thought. We have to solve it, otherwise it will explode in our face. That you cannot just rely on the fact that we have such a sophisticated military to protect us, and we have to have diplomatic solutions like we have with Jordan and Egypt that prove themselves once and again so many years. And that you could not just keep Hamas up and running with Qatari money because you don't want the partners in the Palestinian Authority, that even though they're not Zionist, of course, but they are for a diplomatic solution and they're trying to work against terrorism. And that you could not have normalization in the region like we had in the Abraham Accords without a Palestinian component, which again exploded in our face, and also in the face of the Abraham Accords countries who are now feeling very bad about what they see on Al Jazeera every day. And of course, that this right-wing government cannot really provide security, even though they talk a lot about security. So this is in Israel, and you already see, I highly recommend the research of ACO, the Center of Political Psychology in Hebrew University, led by Professor Eran Lerman, that shows that when you ask Israelis, okay, do you want to end the occupation and have peace? No. But if you ask them, do you want security that is grounded in a regional architecture with all the Arab Sunni countries who want to be part of it, to create a front against Iran and the proxies and also the Sunni Islamist jihadists, and part of it has to be a Palestinian state. Most Israelis are there already, and it will only go more when time passes after the tragedy. And the same also on the Palestinian side. And in terms of the international community, where I see the silver lining is the sense of urgency that completely changed. I mean, we have for years now an international consensus around the two-state solution, with the exception of Iran, Hamas, and the Netanyahu government. Every country in the world. It might be the only thing that Russia, China, and the US could agree on. But for too long, it was just talking point. Yes, after every European meeting, we say we are for the two-state solution. After every Arab League meeting, we are for the two-state solution, but doing nothing about this. After October 7th, we're starting to see that the world understands that we cannot just leave it to Netanyahu, who doesn't want, and to Abbas, who cannot. We have to do something about it, because there is a spillover effect of this conflict all over the world, on the world economy, on the navigation in the Red Sea, on the Iran-Russia connection in Ukraine, on the way the Chinese are looking at American response because of Taiwan, on American campuses, on the elections, Michigan, Wisconsin, you know better than me. And the same in Europe, by the way. My friends in the Netherlands tells me that Geert Wilders would never be gaining so much power if it were not for all those demonstrations after October 7th. So more and more countries in the world start to understand that we have to do something about it. And of course, the question is what? We in J Street, of course, had a great plan what to do if Kamala Harris gets elected. and also what can be done until January 20th, when Biden is still in the White House. We still have this plan, because the lame duck, as they call it, period is still important, even if Trump won the elections. But I could also talk about some silver linings, and I'm saying it as someone who really, again, I'm getting into American politics, you'll have to forgive me, but for me, to see someone like Trump, misogynist, rapist, narcissist, racist, as the leader of the most important country in the world is very sad. But I could see why Trump might be more effective than Biden in implementing the Biden doctrine. When I say the Biden doctrine, I mean what I think it was Tom Friedman who coined it, the Biden doctrine, which was exactly what we needed. And Biden actually, when we supported him back in the previous elections, we were very frustrated because in the first years of his administration, he didn't want to touch the Middle East. He told his team, don't get anything to my desk that has to do with the Middle East. I have China, I have COVID, I have ambitious diplomatic agenda, domestic agenda. I cannot deal with this. It started to change with the Russia-Ukraine war when he understood that you cannot leave a vacuum in the Middle East because the Russians and the Chinese are getting into it, and you have to have some control over the energy prices if you want the Europeans to be able to stand up to Russia, and also if you want to influence inflation here, which you all know how political it is. So Biden kind of put aside his campaign rhetoric and tried to achieve some kind of an understanding with Saudi Arabia. And the idea was that there will be an Israeli component and a Palestinian component, but it's very abstract. The other thing that was positive that we saw with Biden is during the assault of our new government on the Israeli democracy, he knew how to make a distinction between supporting the liberal democracy in Israel while showing a cold shoulder to Netanyahu, who was not invited to the White House, which was quite a precedent. But after October 7th, Biden was all in, not only doing the right thing, but standing on the side of Israel after this brutal attack and telling all our neighbors, don't use this opportunity, and sending 2 aircraft carriers and a nuclear submarine and flotilla to the Red Sea, and of course, giving the Israeli IDF ammunition to protect the country. But he also came with some pretty reasonable demands. You have a right to protect yourself. You have a right to go after Hamas and Hezbollah, but you have to do it according to the international law. You are not Russia, you're a liberal democracy. That's why we have those shared values. You have to separate between Hamas and civilian in Gaza, and you have to make sure that there is a humanitarian assistance. And more important than all, you have to have a plan for the day after. We all know what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, and even in Vietnam, when you're just using the military without a plan. You only make things worse. But what Biden did not realize is that we have a prime minister that doesn't really care about the future of Israel. He cares about his own survival and the survival of his coalition. And this is where we started to, I have to say, be frustrated with Biden, that even though he had the best plan in the world, he wasn't able to use the simple levers of an American administration to make sure that Netanyahu is not playing with him, and that Netanyahu doesn't take for granted as a blank check the American support, but actually acts according to the interest of Israel and the interest of the US and the values of the US. And that's why I think that maybe we will see some positive things even from a Trump administration. Because if you think about what really drives Trump, it's not ideology. Yeah, he did put Huckabee as an ambassador, but he's not of an evangelical Christians who want Armageddon. He actually wants to stop wars because he doesn't want America to be too involved in the world. And because of his narcissism, and someone who really wants to show everybody that he's the biggest deal maker, And because he wants to end wars, as he said, and it's also the MAGA Republican mantra, we don't want to be the officer of the world. And the most important than all, he has so much more leverage on Netanyahu. Because Netanyahu, first of all, he acts according to fear. Just like he fears Ben Gvir and Smotrich more than he feared Biden, so he's going with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, but he does fear Trump. And more than that, for the Netanyahu base to say yes to Trump is much easier than to say yes to Biden. So in many ways, I think that the ceasefire that we have now in Lebanon is a result of the Trump election. And I do hope that it will be Trump who will be able to force Netanyahu to stop this ongoing war in Gaza, where so many people are getting killed. Not only our soldiers, but of course, all those civilian Gazans, where so many, where their hostages are still 101 of them are still in catastrophic situation, and where the evacuees, from their homes cannot go back home. So it's not that I'm happy that Trump was elected, but I'm trying to tell you, keep the optimism alive. We have a lot to do even with Trump, because Trump really wants this Saudi deal, and the Saudis, unlike before October 7th, are very clear that nothing is going to happen without a political horizon for the Palestinians. And because in order to have this Saudi deal, you need 2/3 in Congress, which means the Democrats are still an important player, and it has to be bipartisan. So I started with very bad news. I'm trying to end with some silver lining, because I do want all of you to not give up on us, to not give up on America, and to do whatever you can to make sure that liberal Israelis, liberal Palestinians, and liberal Americans eventually get what we want, which is the end of the wars and peace and democracy for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stay up there, if you can. Before we get to questions, I just want to ask a couple based on what you just shared. So to delve into some of the specifics from both directions, if you can share, in your opinion, some of the mistakes you think Netanyahu has made since October 7th, but more importantly, what you hope to see politically. What are the steps that need to be taken to arrive to the two-state solution or the destination you hope will be achieved?
Well, I don't know if they called it mistakes, because what drives Netanyahu is not what used to drive Israeli prime ministers, which is what are the interests of the country, how we could protect the country, how we could promote its situation. What drives Netanyahu for many years now is how to create a coalition that will get with 3 corruption trials, and how to make sure that he has a loyal base. He turned the Likud party in some ways the same as the Republican Party here. I still remember that J Street used to host people like Jim Baker and Condoleezza Rice and many saint Republicans. But now it's all a cult personality, and nobody dares to. And you see Mitt Romney is retiring. You saw what happened to Liz Cheney. And the same happened in Israel. The revisionists who were the center of the Likud party are not voting Likud anymore, none of them. And it's all about who going to bring power and money and control. And that's why I can't say that he's making mistakes. He's maybe acting very rationally to protect his own skin. But for us in Israel, it's a catastrophe. And you see that the Levin-Rotman judicial coup, who stops for a little because of the demonstrations and because of the war, now it's full speed ahead. And while they kind of count on so many liberal Israelis that are now trying to help the country, whether it's in reserve service or in filling the vacuum of the government is just going ahead. And he had those Jewish supremacists in his government that actually think that Gaza could be filled with settlement. So I don't know if it's mistakes. I mean, I just know that we have to make sure that he's not staying in power. He, according to the, he kind of can stay until November 2026, but in Israel, governments never stay the whole term. And the question is what will bring him down? I'm sure that we have to demonstrate in the streets, but it's not enough. There is now a rift between the ultra-Orthodox and the kind of national religious, that because of the service of the recruitment of the ultra-Orthodox who became so critical now when so many soldiers have died and so many people are in reserve for so long. And, but I do hope that, that it will also be the power from the outside, the power of the US and the liberal democracies in Europe that will tell him, listen, you are dragging the region and the world to endless war, which could spill out. And you saw now what started to happen in Syria, and now you see in Korea. A lot of it is a result of the fact that, the Putins of the world and are feeling that, they could do whatever they want. So we have to stand up to them, and that's why we need a strong liberal force in the US, a strong liberal force in Israel, and a strong J Street to make sure that it translates into politics.
So if you were the prime minister, what would be the foreign policy changes you would make?
If I were the prime minister, I would stop the war immediately, go for this deal, and I'm the last person who will advocate for Hamas, but Hamas' position is pretty clear from the outset. They want their prisoners out of jail, and they want the stop of the war and Israel out of Gaza. I would accept it, not only for the hostages, even though the hostages are enough reason to do it, but because you cannot win a terrorist organization just by military force. We did enough with military force. Now we need to move into a diplomatic plan. And we have this diplomatic plan. Blinken was 11 times in the region, spoke with 6 Arab ministers. They're all willing to use their money and to even put boots on the ground in order to create alternative for Hamas in Gaza, invited by a revitalized Palestinian Authority, because it's quite clear that Abbas lost legitimacy, so you need a reform there, and that could lead to this, to the normalization with Saudi Arabia that will only happen if a Palestinian state is going to be created, and we have to understand when the Saudis normalize relation with Israel, it's not just Saudi Arabia, it's the entire Sunni world, it's Indonesia, it's Malaysia, it's Pakistan, it's a change, dramatic change. And the only reason why this is not happening right now is because of the Netanyahu survival issues. So I would do that. By the way, if I were Israel Prime Minister, I would not wait for the end of negotiation to recognize a Palestinian state. I will start with recognize a Palestinian state, and then I have negotiations about where exactly the borders, what's the land swaps, what are the arrangements for the holy part of Jerusalem. But one of the reasons why we're keep on track in this situation, and I'm saying it as a Zionist and a patriot, if we don't end the occupation will end us. And if the Palestinians will not be free in their own country, we will never be free and secure in our own country. So there is nothing that is more of a Zionist patriotic interest than to help the Palestinians create their own state. And I would start with this tomorrow. And people say, but the leadership of the Palestinians, well, the leadership of the Palestinians, the fact that we don't see a leadership is because this exactly was the plan of Netanyahu, to keep Hamas high, not let the moderate Palestinians to show anything for their people. And while they were believing in still a two-state solution, they saw more and more settlements and a government that takes their money and giving it to Hamas. So all of this could change. And I'm a peace activist, but I'm not a pacifist. I believe that Israel will always need to have a strong military, and Israel will always need a strong relations with the US, but we need so much more diplomacy than just brute force that can't really provide security.
So I'm going to jump to questions that I've received, and I hope I understand them. But the first one is kind of asking you to move from activist to observer, and just share with us what you see happening next, predicting what's going to happen and evolve.
I was never meant to be an academic. I'm always an activist, so I always have an agenda. And also, I'm always holding to optimism, because I believe that optimism is not only a way to perceive the world, it's a way to change the world. So I really want to see a situation when Trump is saying to Netanyahu, listen, until January 20th, when I'm in the White House, I want this over. I want the hostages back home. I want the end of the war in Gaza. And then we could start the healing. We could get my family in Kibbutz Manara back home. We could get my family in Re'im and Be'eri back home. And we could start to work on normalization with Saudi Arabia, with, of course, a political horizon for the Palestinians. I don't know if that will happen. Nobody could really predict the future. I just know that we have to work hard to make sure that the future goes in that direction.
And what will strengthen the Israeli left so that change will ultimately take place in the electorate?
Well, I think that what we find out after this right-wing government was elected, that all those liberals that for years were not really involved in politics, were not very ideological, they were waiting until their startup will become a great exit, and what is the new great restaurant in Tel Aviv, and what is the next great jazz performance, all of a sudden find out that they have a voice. And the same people who did not know anything about politics and they left all the political energy to the settlers and the ultra-Orthodox, all of a sudden you hear them standing in Kaplan quoting Montesquieu about separation of power. And I believe that this silent majority now became more powerful. But they need to know that it's not enough to work to protect our Supreme Court, because you cannot have democracy with occupation of another people, and you cannot have just democracy for Jews. And I think that after October 7th, more and more of those liberals who are demonstrating understood the connection, that what Levin is doing and Rotman is doing is actually to help the Smotrich and the Ben-Gvirs of the world to change the situation on the ground in the West Bank and in Israel inside. And I do believe that they could become a force, but they will need our friends, especially in America, and especially the Jewish community of America, to show them that they're not alone. Because one of the reasons why the peace camp in Israel kind of evaporated is because the two-state solution stopped being an issue. And people started to vote on the price of cottage cheese and other things rather than the most existential thing for Israel. So with the help of the international community, I believe that the liberal majority of Israel could win the next elections. By the way, every poll for the next election shows that this coalition will not lead the country in the next elections, but we have to get there sooner rather than later.
Thank you. These questions are tougher than mine. So, as American Jews, we've also always been proud of the ethics of the IDF, taking pride in not only that it was an ethical army, but one of the most ethical. Do you believe that's still true?
Well, I have to tell you that, like most Israelis, I feel very connected to the IDF. I was an officer in the IDF. I participated in the first Lebanese war. One of the reasons why I became a diplomat is that I saw in Lebanon that to be strong militarily is not enough, and we need also diplomacy. My son was in reserve until now the ceasefire in Lebanon. He was in reserves from October 7th, and you could just imagine what it means to fear this phone call that so many families get. But I think that those mantras, we are the most moral military. I mean, Israel military is the military of the people. And in the Israeli people, you have moral people and you have immoral people. And the same in the military. In the past, the government were kind of showing a much more moral direction. But when you have in your government people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, what do you accept from the soldiers? So I do believe that even though the most of the IDF are still based on morality, even the most moral soldiers cannot remain moral when you put them in situations like we are in Gaza or in the West Bank. And they just stories of breaking the silence when they tell about very moral people what happened when they put in this situation. You cannot be moral in an ongoing occupation. So I think those mantras are not helping us. Maybe they're helping us feel good, but they're not helping us make Israel better. And and as a former diplomat, and we have an ambassador here, Alan Salomon. I don't know if it's like that in the State Department, but in Israeli diplomacy, it's all about showing that Israel is great. And for me, one of the reasons why I left diplomacy and now in J Street, that it's much more important for me to make Israel great than to show that Israel is great. And this should be our goal, to make sure that we are as moral as we want the military to be perceived. And all the stories of the Hasbara will not help if the reality will not change.
Can you address the recent vote that was supported by J Street and the senators of our Commonwealth, Warren and Markey, limiting weapons to Israel with attached to conditions?
Yeah. So, it's important to understand, Senator Sanders wanted to move ahead with this resolution even before the elections. But for us in J Street, it was very important to make sure that we don't create distraction because we really wanted the Biden administration and because of the Biden administration activities, Harris to get elected. But after the election, we felt that this situation where Netanyahu is taking for granted and using American support as if, he can do whatever he wants with it as a blank check, we need to send a message. And this is why we decided to support this resolution. And everybody speaks about Sanders, but there are so many senators who are amazing friends of Israel. We could argue if Sanders is or not. That's a different discussion. That vote for military aid to Israel, the $3.8 billion. They vote for the supplemental of the Iron Dome. That support Israel day in and day out, and they're getting hammered by people in their districts for doing this. But they wanted to send a message. By the way, it was clear to everybody that this is not going to affect the real situation on the ground because those, this support was, but it was meant to send a message, both to Netanyahu that you could not treat American aid as if it's a blank check, and to send a message to Biden that you could not let Netanyahu play with you. You are the superpower. I have to tell you, as an Israeli, I want Israeli Knesset to make sure that that our military aid to other countries is not being used against our interests and against our values. I have to tell you, I'm until today ashamed that Israel was supporting Azerbaijan during the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh. And we did it only with Turkey and Pakistan. And the same thing, I think it is completely legitimate for American legislators to say, as much as we support Israel, Netanyahu is not the only thing about Israel. And if we want Israel to be secure, if we want this awful war to end, where more and more soldiers getting killed, where hostages are getting killed every day, and with this catastrophe, which is a moral bankruptcy in Gaza, should end. And this is exactly what the J Street position was. And of course, there's so many people that are trying to show that we're not pro-Israel, but I could assure you that, this move is meant to support the security of Israel and not how people present it.
This question, I actually received the fullness of this question, but I think it's related because many people expressed concern about the vote, that it wasn't the specifics, but that it would lead to something greater, that would threaten Israel's existence. This question is, how would you respond to someone who says if you're critical of Israel, you're promoting anti-Semitism?
I would say that the reality is exactly the opposite. I remember the days before J Street was created, that so many Jews felt that they could not be part of the pro-Jewish community because they were told that the only way to be pro-Israel is to accept what the Israeli government is doing. And by creating a space where you could love Israel with all your heart, even if you're critical of the government, I think that we're actually helping against anti-Semitism. And we're creating, for example, J Street U in campuses. We're giving those students the option to be Zionist and progressive at the same time. And I think that because of that, we're actually making sure that that it's not becoming only binary, that either you're pro-Hamas or pro-Israel. So I actually think that what we do here and what we did with this resolution in Congress is helping against anti-Semitism and against anti-Israeli sentiments in politics and in the American culture, society.
Now they're coming faster than I can read them all, but I'm going to ask two because I'm not sure one is in your purview. So one question was about J Street's work on the American college campus, if you want to address that, if not, maybe someone later. Two is, I'll just ask, just in case, is another question is, who is to blame for not getting a deal done?
Okay. So first of all, I don't know the specifics exactly on how many campuses we are. I think 60. And I know that Jeanette and Madison could say much more than me. But I can just tell you that when I was Consul General here in New England and I was kind of covering a lot of campuses, I would have want an organization like J Street that will give this space in campuses that was not there. And that students that tend to be, believe in tikkun olam, believe in social justice, believe in separation of state and church, and they were told, no, in order to be Zionist, you have to support this government with Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. It's crazy. So I actually think that our work in the campuses is making sure that your children would be able to remain Zionist. And for me, by the way, against all the common wisdom, you cannot really be progressive if you're not Zionist, because how can you not support the right of the Jewish people to their own land? Just like you cannot be Zionist if you're not progressive, because if you read the Declaration of Independence of Israel, it's about equality for everybody. So I actually think that what J Street is created in this space that is exactly supporting the future of and the relations of the Jewish community with Israel for the generations to come.
Another question. I'll ask two at a time. I think they're related. One is, why did Hezbollah agree to the ceasefire, and how does one deal with Iran?
Okay, so I think that there are two reasons why Hezbollah agreed to the deal. First of all, Hezbollah did get hit very significantly, but more important, for Iran, Hezbollah was kind of a tool to protect the Iranian nuclear program in case Israel attack, and they started to see that this resource is getting weaker and weaker. And more than that, I think people in Israel don't realize, but there is a change in Iran. And I'm not talking just about the people in Iran that are the most pro-Western and anti-regime in the world. I'm talking about within the Mullah Ayatollah's regime, the election of Pezeshkian, who wants a deal. He doesn't want war. The reason why he put Arakchi, who was the deputy of Zarif during the Iran negotiations, is because they want a deal. Everybody in Israel thinks that it's all the Revolutionary Guard. No. Khamenei, the great leader, has to balance between the Revolutionary Guard and the more moderates who want still Iran to be an Islamic state, but they think that it's more important to have the Iranian economy and than to care about Lebanon or Yemen. And this regime, since Raisi died in the accident, I don't know if it was really an accident, Khamenei actually let Pezeshkian get elected. If Khamenei wouldn't want Pezeshkian to get elected, he wouldn't get elected, which means that Iran now wants an agreement. And they don't want to be dragged into a war. They don't think it serves their interest. On top of that, I think, as I said before, that in terms of the Israeli agreement, it was a lot because of the Trump election, because the same deal that Amos Hochstein was working on for months is the deal eventually that was agreed. And the reason why Israel accepted it, because Trump told Netanyahu, I want this over before I'm coming into the White House. So those are the main reasons. Now, how we deal with Iran. It's important to understand because there's a lot of fantasies that Israel could take out the Iranian nuclear program, which is, which is a fantasy. The Iranian nuclear program is very different than what Iraq and Syria had, which was one installation that you could just hit in an attack. It's spread all over the place. They have enough uranium already for enough bombs. And the main reason is because Trump withdrew from the JCPOA and made Iran into a nuclear threshold state. And he also broke this coalition that Obama worked so hard to build, that Russia and China, with the European countries, were with the US sanctioning Iran. And now Russia is in bed with Iran. China became the biggest exporter, so Trump could put as many sanctions as he wanted on Iran. It wouldn't help because they have China. I think the only way to really stop the Iranian nuclear weapon and also to change the Iran behavior in the region from using all those proxies in Yemen and in Lebanon and in Iraq is an agreement. By the way, I know it's against common wisdom, but I think that if someone would have told Trump that the JCPOA was his idea, not Obama, he would celebrate it, and he would say, I need I need a Nobel Prize, because the only reason why he went out of the agreement on top of the Bibi pressure was because it was Obama's. So I actually believe that, there is a way to stop the Iranian nuclear weapon by force, but it means another war like you had in Iraq and Afghanistan. I don't know any American who wants to go back to this situation. It leaves only one way, which is diplomacy. Diplomacy backed by force, you never, you never tell Iran that you're completely safe from an American attack. And I also think that this plan, the Biden doctrine, which means that Israel, with the Saudis, with the Jordanians, with the Egyptians, with the Bahraini, with the Emiratis, are in one front, I think it will very much deter Iran for doing things. And by the way, according to international media, I don't want to say that I know, Israel will have so much more ability in this field than Iran will ever had. And the Iranians are not suicidal. So I think that the best response to Iran is that the next administration, with the support of Congress, and I hope that this time Israel will be part of the international alliance to go for the deal and not try to work against the administration, I believe is able to achieve a diplomatic agreement with Iran that will stop the nuclear ambitions.
Another question. Many in America are trying to understand why Harris lost, why Trump won. The question is, why does Netanyahu continue to hold power?
Yeah. Well, I think that to tell you why Trump won, it will be presumptuous, you all American, but I think there are similarities. I think that there is a global phenomena that because of social networks, because of the resentment of some of the working class towards globalization and the elites, the universities, the media, people who supposed to be losing when right-wing capitalists win are supporting them because of your cultural issues, because of nationalism, because, and I think that this is happening in Israel with Netanyahu, that he was able to connect more than the left to the, to the working class Israelis. And I think the same happened in America. I think that also in America, because unfortunately we didn't have a female option, some of those populations that we thought that should have to be with the Democrats turned out to be more conservative in terms of their belief that a woman could be a president. And for me as a feminist, it's so sad that twice Trump became president and not a much more talented women that were there. But this is the fact, and we have to learn. We can't just blame the reality. We as liberals have to learn how to be more effective and how to connect with the people. And what can I say? The fact that you explain everybody that America did better in terms of the economy than any other OECD country and the macro numbers are great doesn't help when people feel that they pay more when they go to the grocery. So I think all of us have to learn from our mistakes. I can tell you that in Israel, if the elections would happen tomorrow, Netanyahu will not be a prime minister. You still have 4 years.
Who would be? Who would be were elections?
Well, it will be someone from the wide liberal camp. For me, people who are not actively work to end the occupation are not necessarily liberal, but liberal meaning that they still believe in the system of Supreme Court and media, and that means anywhere from Bennett to Yair Golan. I would hope that it will also include the Arab countries. I'm not sure, the Arab parties. By the way, there is a great effort that I believe should be supported of Arab votes. If the Arab vote will be in the same percentage as the Jewish vote, the liberal camp will definitely win. And I know that you're going to have an event with Omdim Beyachad, with Standing Together. It's a great organization that is collaborating between Jews and Palestinian citizens of Israel. And organizations like that are also helping the Arabs to not give up on Israeli democracy and vote. But whether it is Bennett, who's far from me ideologically, or Yair Golan, that is closer to me, even if he's not exactly my cup of tea, I do believe that this kind of leaders will eventually go for an agreement if it will be this kind of regional infrastructure led by the US. They will support it. I want to remind you that Rabin was not a two-stater when he started Oslo, and that after the Yom Kippur War, Israelis were also in trauma and they voted for a hawk Begin, but when the US and Sadat made the move, Israelis eventually supported the peace with Egypt and moving out of Sinai and dismantling the settlements. So I actually believe that the majority of Israelis are somewhere in the center, and with leadership, they will go there. The same Israelis who voted for Sharon when he said Netzarim, which is a settlement in Gaza and Tel Aviv, voted for him when he left Gaza, and the same Israelis who voted for Begin because they were under trauma after the Yom Kippur War eventually supported with the peace with Egypt. So I actually believe that even if it will not be exactly someone that has the end of the occupation in their kishkes like me, we could still end the occupation if it will be a different government than Netanyahu and his partners.
I think I'm going to transition now from the questions about the conflict to J Street and just ask you to conclude with why people should support J Street.
So listen, I was an Israeli diplomat. I started my career in the office of Shimon Peres right after the diplomat course, and was there in the times of Oslo. And then my first post abroad was in Washington. In Washington, I was amazed by the power of the Jewish organizations and lobbies. And I thought, wow, it's so amazing that this small country has so much influence over the most important country of the world. It took me some years, including the time I was here in Boston and learned to know the Jewish community, that those organizations are not representing the majority of Jews. Because the majority of Jews still care deeply about Israel, but don't think that caring about Israel is necessarily saying yes to any Israeli government, especially when the Israeli government became more and more right-wing. And on top of that, as someone who believed that the most existential threat on the future of Israel and Zionism is the occupation, I felt that those Jewish organizations were making it suicidal to any American politician to speak about a Palestinian state and Palestinian right, which for me is not just the moral thing to do, it's the strategic do for Zionism. And that's why when J Street was created, while I was Consul General here, I said, wow, this is exactly what we always needed. Because I met so many Jews who were so conflicted. They care about Israel, they love Israel, but how could they support, this kind of government that treat them as second-class Jews if they're not Orthodox and treat the Arabs as second-class people? And J Street gave them the opportunity to connect with Israel, to love Israel, with their values. And that's why I decided to join J Street. However, I was skeptical. I didn't think that this startup could become a real player because I knew how powerful all those legacy organizations and how they connected with the federation and how much money and organization. But I have to say that I was wrong. Today, when I see a situation that 60% of the Democrats in Congress are endorsed by J Street, and we don't have to run after them to be endorsed, they are running after us. When I see that we're in the 50-yard line of the Jewish community, yeah, we have to our left Jewish Voices for Peace, and If Not Now, and some who are still Israel is always right no matter what, but the majority of Jews, and we just saw it in the last survey, are where we are. So we are now in the 50-yard line of the Democratic Party, the 50-yard line of the Jewish community. What we don't have yet is the resources that some other organizations have. So we have to punch above our weight. But I think if we gain some weight, we will be able to punch even stronger. And that's why I think for people who care about Israel, if you don't care about Israel, go to see a good concert. But if you care about Israel, the best way to make sure that Israel remain the homeland of the Jewish people and that the American Jews are connected with Israel and so are their children, is to support the J Street cause, because we're not just an advocacy organization. We're a political organization that makes sure that we affect the American foreign policy. And I believe this is the most Zionist and patriotic thing you could do.
So before we thank Nadav formally, I want to thank Neil Silverstein for chairing. And Neil, I want to thank you personally for asking me to help moderate and facilitate the question period. But I feel like I should ask you. You have the opportunity to ask the final question or come up and thank Nadav. But if you do have a question, I left a few minutes.
So my question is, I'm really inspired by your optimism. And if you could leave us with one thing that gives you the most optimism about the future, tell us.
So whenever I go to those demonstrations in Begi now to help the hostages and in Kaplan, and I see so many amazing Israelis. And then when I come here and I meet people like you who care deeply about Israel with their values, that keeps me hopeful. And I believe that we have the power if we just do something about what we believe. How did Kamala say it? Just do something? And we have to act enough to believe in the right values, and I believe that we have people like you who can make it, so that's what makes me hopeful.
Great. So as we close this out here, I just want to thank Nadav for being with us. I want to thank Rabbi Joel, Rabbi Jordy for helping to pull this together. We thought that we would be able to group questions into different categories, but every question was its own unique, different area of questioning. It was really powerful. I want to thank the amazing J Street staff in the Boston area, Jeanette, Madison, Sarah, and Adam, who do such great work. Sorry. Oh, stand up, yes. I also want to call out Nancy Buck and Elaine Landis, co-chairs of J Street, Massachusetts. Nancy is also on the J Street board, national board, with TB's own ambassador, Alan Solomon, who is the immediate past chair. So as Nadav left us with, we want to act. So I want to give you a couple of opportunities of how we can engage with J Street, but before I talk about the what, I just want to say a bit about the why. Why are we here? What moved me to really invest in this work? Like all of us, I've been really struggling since October 7th with what's happening in Israel and in Gaza. And I actually had the opportunity early this year in March with Rabbi Joel and Rabbi Jordy and some others to travel on a solidarity mission to Israel in March. And we bared witness, we saw, we listened. And we were in Kibbutz Kfar Aza, in the Gaza envelope. We listened to hostage families. And we hear a lot about the amazing resilience of the Israeli people. But to see it and live it and walk side by side with Israelis in this moment was really powerful. And then we had a chance, Rob Joseph, who's here, who leads our Artser group here, and I had the chance to go up north to Haifa with TB's sister congregation, or Hadash in Haifa. And there, again, we listened, we held space, we got a chance to be part of Shabbat. And even though it's their kids who are in Gaza and Lebanon, not our kids, they were really clear that we are in this together. And we have a shared future for the Jewish people. And it inspired me to really drill down and lean into J Street. And all of us are struggling. We've all had difficult conversations with our families and our friends. We're all trying to hold multiple things in our heads at the same time. So I really have struggled to find my voice. How do we show our love and commitment to Israel at the same time that we support Palestinians and Palestinian self-determination, especially at a moment where all of our voices, the loudest voices seems to be on the far right and the far left. And I found my voice through J Street. And you've heard it all from Nadav this evening, how we can act towards a safe and secure democratic Israel and for safe and secure Palestinian people. So, amid all the frustration and sadness many of us feel, my message and Nadav's message is don't get mad, organize. So here's a couple of ways to do that. You can join J Street's advocacy work, sharing its positions with members of Congress through phone calls and Zoom and in-person meetings. You can share J Street's message. A lot of folks don't really understand what J Street is. It gets crowded out by some of the noise. So you can share J Street's message and mission with your networks and temple communities by hosting events at your home or synagogue. And for those on Zoom at TBE and here from TBE, as Joel said at the very beginning, we want to organize here at TBE. So if you want to get involved at TBE, if you want to be part of working together to educate our community about J Street, and again, as Nadav said, to act. You can talk to myself, you can talk to Nancy Horowitz is here, Suzanne Scher, Risa Shames. You can talk to any one of us, and we've got places to sign up. So if you're not from TBE and you've signed up and you want to get involved, indicate so. And if you are from TBE and you want to be part of this, then we've got sign-up sheets on this clipboard. You can do that. One more thing before we close. Well, two more things before we close. One is Nadav mentioned Standing Together. And there's an event Wednesday, that's tomorrow, at 7 at Temple Sinai, co-sponsored by Temple Sinai, Temple Beth Zion, Temple Israel, Dorche Tzedek, B'nai B'rith, actually Hillel B'nai Torah, New Israel Fund, and Boston Friends of Standing Together. And then again on Thursday at Old South Church. And I have the flyer here if you want to learn more about that. And lastly, I want to call up Cantor Emerita Jody Suffren to this out. Thank you so much for being here.
I would just like to say how good it is to hear a hopeful perspective. Thank you so much, Nadav. I thought it would be appropriate to conclude with hope, hatikva, and if you will rise, if you would like to find the words, they're on page 678 in the prayer books you can find underneath your seats. But please join me.
The Israeli flag is next to the windows.
Kol od balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homia ulfate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia, od lo avda tikvatenu, hatikva shnot alpayim, liotam chofshi be'artzenu, Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim liotam chofshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll gather outside in the atrium.